$240 million. That is what the United States Navy handed Iran, or so every headline said. One missile, one drone, one very public funeral for the most expensive unmanned aircraft in the American naval inventory. Iran's state media ran the footage on loop. The Sevom Khordad battery crew posed for photographs. Generals gave speeches about the invincibility of Iranian air defenses. The math was displayed on broadcast television, simple and clean. A $7.2 million surface-to-air missile system had just destroyed a $240 million American surveillance drone. A 1-to-33 cost ratio, entirely in Tehran's favor. On paper, the most efficient kill in the Islamic Republic's military history. That math was the wrong equation. 3 months after the engagement over the Gulf of Oman, classified after-action assessments began circulating through CENTCOM and the Navy's electronic warfare community. What those assessments described was not a loss. It was a purchase. The Triton did not go down because Iran outmaneuvered the United States Navy. The Triton went down because the United States Navy needed it to. The drone was not shot down. It was spent. And the receipt for what the Navy bought with it, the complete electronic order of battle for 3 Iranian air defense regiments, covering 600 kilometers of coastline, is sitting loaded into the mission computers of every EA-18G Growler in the North Arabian Sea right now. The real math looks different. To understand what actually happened over the Gulf of Oman, you need to understand the problem the United States Navy was trying to solve, and why every conventional answer to that problem was broken before it started. Iran's coastline stretches roughly 2,440 kilometers from the Iraqi border to the Pakistani frontier. Along that coastline, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy and the Iranian Air Defense Force have spent the better part of 2 decades building one of the most deliberately opaque anti-access environments in the Middle East. Not the most sophisticated, not the most capable in raw technical terms, but built around a single strategic insight. You cannot suppress what you cannot see. We covered the geometry of Iran's coastal defense network in the video on Bandar Abbas. If you have not seen that one, the short version is this. Iran does not fight the way the Pentagon trains to fight. Iran fights the way an asymmetric actor survives against a technologically superior force. The doctrine is not based on winning an exchange. It is based on denying the conditions that make an exchange possible. The backbone of that denial is the Sevom Khordad system. Officially designated the third of Khordad, it is a domestically developed medium-range surface-to-air missile battery with an engagement envelope extending to roughly 75 kilometers and a service ceiling above 30,000 feet. Its targeting system, the Mirage 4 radar, is a passive-active hybrid. In passive mode, it listens to the electromagnetic environment around it, building a picture of what is flying nearby without transmitting a single detectable pulse. It switches to active mode only for the final acquisition and guidance sequence. That switch is the entire problem. To suppress an air defense system, you need 3 variables: its operating frequency, its physical location, and its reaction time. Suppression of enemy air defenses, SEAD, doctrine requires you to either destroy the system before it can engage, using an anti-radiation missile that homes on radar emissions, or jam it so completely that its operators cannot guide a weapon to intercept. Both options demand the same prerequisite. The system has to be radiated. It has to be on. You have to hear it before you can blind it. The Mirage 4 has a cold start to engagement window, measured in single-digit seconds. It activates, acquires, fires, and goes dark again. Without a preloaded emissions profile, the specific frequency, the precise pulse repetition interval, the exact hopping sequence of that particular battery, an EA-18G Growler trying to jam it is guessing. A guessing Growler is a $67 million aircraft that cannot protect the strike package behind it. For the Navy, Operating in an environment where Iranian coastal defense coverage overlaps across multiple battery positions, from Bandar Abbas to Chabahar, this is not an acceptable variable. You cannot put a carrier air wing feet dry over the Iranian coast on a guessing jamming profile. You need the data. The question was always how to get it. The conventional answer is the decoy. Fly something expendable close enough to an air defense battery to force it to illuminate. Record the emissions, extract the intelligence, lose the decoy, gain the profile. That answer has a problem. Cheap decoys have cheap radar cross-sections. Cheap radar cross-sections do not credibly threaten anything worth activating a $7.2 million battery for. A small, commercially adjacent unmanned vehicle flying a standard altitude profile over the Gulf of Oman does not make a trained Iranian radar operator press the activation switch. He evaluates the contact, assesses the threat level as negligible, and keeps his hand off the button. He has been drilled, specifically and repeatedly, not to illuminate against non-threatening contacts. Every pulse he transmits is a pulse the Americans can collect. He knows this. His discipline is his primary weapon. For the provocation to work, for the battery to actually activate and give you the emissions data you need, the target has to be real. It has to represent a genuine threat to the coastal defense network. Something worth shooting at. Something worth burning your cover for. The MQ-4C Triton is worth shooting at. The Triton is the Navy's high-altitude, long-endurance maritime surveillance platform. It operates above 55,000 feet, far above the engagement ceiling of most Iranian systems. Its wingspan stretches 130 feet, wider than a Boeing 737. It carries the AN/Z-PY-3 multifunction active sensor radar and AN/DDS acoustic system. The sensor package responsible for cueing strike groups to surface contacts, submarine signatures, and coastal activity across a maritime surveillance radius that covers the entire Strait of Hormuz and surrounding waters simultaneously. When a Triton appears on Iranian long-range acquisition radar, and they can see it, their Gadir over-the-horizon systems can paint a contact at that altitude at extended range. It does not look like a decoy. It does not look like a test drone on a training profile. It looks like the surveillance asset that, if allowed to complete its mission, will hand precise targeting coordinates to an FA-18 pilot waiting over the Arabian Sea. It looks like the eyes of a strike group running final reconnaissance before a weapons release order comes down. That is a real threat. That is a contact worth activating your battery for. The Triton's engagement was not a failure of American surveillance capability. It was a design feature of a collection plan called, in the operational language later reflected in after-action summaries, the flypaper configuration. A flight profile specifically engineered to be compelling enough that a disciplined Iranian battery crew would break their own doctrine and illuminate. 200 nautical miles to the south, an EA-18G Growler was already airborne and waiting. I spent time going through what is publicly available on the AN/ALQ-99 tactical jamming system the Growler carries, and one technical detail kept pulling at me. The ALQ-99's passive collection capability, its ability to intercept, characterize, and record radar emissions without transmitting anything of its own, operates at ranges well beyond the system's active jamming envelope. At 200 nautical miles, in the right electromagnetic propagation conditions over open ocean, the ALQ-99 can build a usable emissions profile from a ground-based radar operating at full power. The Growler does not have to be close. It just has to be listening. When the Mirage 4 activated to engage the Triton, it did not just turn on a missile battery. It opened a transmission that lasted from initial acquisition through terminal guidance. An unbroken window of active radiation that spanned, according to the engagement geometry, somewhere between 45 and 90 seconds of continuous emissions. Acquisition frequency, recorded. Guidance uplink frequency, recorded. Frequency hopping sequence, reconstructed from observed pulse samples. Pulse repetition interval, captured. Crew reaction time, the interval between contact acquisition and missile launch, logged as a behavioral signature unique to that battery and that crew. That behavioral signature includes what SEAD planners call the commitment window, the 11-second interval after missile launch during which the battery crew is committed to tracking the intercept, their radar fully active, unable to go dark without risking a miss. In those 11 seconds, a strike package knows exactly what the battery is doing and exactly what it is broadcasting. The Growler does not need to guess which frequency to jam. It knows. The harm shooters do not need to wait for the battery to illuminate. They already know its location to within meters. The Triton did not need to survive. It needed to illuminate the target. The operation was clean on paper. Here is where it almost wasn't. The engagement happened in the early morning hours over the Gulf of Oman, which is standard practice for high-value unmanned flight operations. Reduced visual acquisition risk, lower maritime traffic density, minimal commercial radar interference. But low-light conditions over open water, combined with the Growler's extended standoff distance, created a collection environment that was technically demanding. At 200 nautical miles, the AN/ALQ-99's intercept quality for frequency hopping signals degrades. You need a minimum number of observed frequency hops to reconstruct the full hopping sequence. If the Savam-Khordad crew had executed perfect post-launch discipline, shutting the Mirage 4 down within seconds of missile release, the Growler might have had a partial profile. Useful, but incomplete. The Iranian crew did not execute perfect post-launch discipline. After the missile connected, the Mirage 4 remained active for an additional 23 to 31 seconds. The most probable explanation is simple. The crew was watching the kill. They stayed on the radar to observe the impact. They wanted confirmation. In the language of electronic warfare, that post-kill loiter turned an incomplete collection into a comprehensive one. The full frequency sequence was captured. The complete behavioral profile was logged. Iran's discipline and activation held. Their discipline and deactivation failed at the precise moment it mattered most. Now for the math nobody ran on Iranian television. A Savam-Khordad battery package, radar vehicle, launcher vehicles, command and control element, support infrastructure, represents a capital investment of approximately $7.2 million. The missile that intercepted the Triton costs roughly $1.1 million per round. Total Iranian expenditure on the engagement, approximately $8.3 million, against a $240 million American airframe. Every financial model says Tehran wins. Run the actual attrition math. The intelligence the Triton was designed to collect, surveillance imagery, surface contact data, acoustic signatures, was not what the flypaper mission was optimized for. The Growler was the collection platform. The Triton was the stimulus. The Navy did not lose a sensor. It consumed a stimulus package to activate a threat, and the real sensor recorded everything from 200 miles away, outside Iranian radar coverage, never once at risk. What $8.3 million in Iranian air defense expenditure bought the United States Navy? The complete electronic order of battle for a minimum of 3 Iranian air defense regiments. The suppression doctrine for every Savam-Khordad and Rod battery in the sector, from Bandar Abbas to Chabahar. 6 sympathetic battery activations. Neighboring positions that came online briefly as the engagement developed, each one broadcasting its own emission signature into the Growler's waiting receivers. 6 batteries. 6 emissions profiles. 6 sets of frequency data and crew behavioral signatures for a single airframe. Type flypaper in the comments if you think this was the most expensive intelligence investment in recent naval history, or if you think the drone's crew on the ground in Patuxent River knew exactly what they were flying into. What's most surprising about this operation is not the cost asymmetry. It's the doctrine the cost asymmetry reveals. The Navy has spent decades trying to separate collection assets from the threat environment, to keep the expensive sensors out of reach of the systems trying to destroy them. The flypaper configuration inverts that entire logic. You put the expensive sensor into the threat envelope deliberately. The credibility of the target is the mechanism. The sensor's vulnerability is the feature, not the bug. Iran's entire coastal air defense doctrine is built around one core assumption. American commanders will not sacrifice high-value assets as collection stimuli. The risk calculus is too visible. The political cost of losing a $240 million drone is too high. The oversight committees will ask questions. The public will see the footage. The assumption was that American institutional caution would protect Iranian emission security. That assumption was the vulnerability, not the radar frequency, not the missile range, the assumption. What this tells us about how modern naval warfare actually works. The most expensive phase of any strike operation is not the precision munitions. It is the intelligence infrastructure that makes those munitions effective. A JDAM that knows where to go is a 500-pound problem for the target. A JDAM with bad coordinates is a 500-pound problem for everyone nearby. The Navy did not just buy suppression data over the Gulf of Oman. It bought precision for every subsequent strike package that will ever cross that coastline. The operational impact compounds. Before the Triton engagement, a strike package targeting Iranian coastal facilities in the Bandar Abbas sector required a pre-suppression phase lasting 20 to 35 minutes. EA-18G Growlers would fly ahead of the package, using estimated or partially characterized Iranian radar frequencies to attempt jamming, while FA-18S, carrying AGM-88 high-speed anti-radiation missiles, loitered for opportunity shots at batteries that illuminated. The approach works, but the exposure time is substantial. Every minute of loiter before a strike is risk accumulated and surprise degraded. The longer you take to suppress the defenses, the more time Iranian commanders have to disperse mobile assets, reposition fast attack craft, and wake up systems they prefer to keep hidden. After the Triton engagement, that pre-suppression phase compresses to 4 to 6 minutes. Not because the Growler is faster, because the Growler already knows. The jamming waveform for the Mirage 4 is preloaded in the mission computer before the aircraft leaves the carrier deck. The moment the Growler's receivers detect the characteristic signature of that radar beginning its activation sequence, the jamming response is already cued. The Growler is not reacting to the battery, it is preempting it. The difference between 20 minutes of pre-suppression exposure and 4 minutes is not an efficiency metric. It is the distinction between a strike package that arrives over Iranian coastal targets while the defense is still organizing, and one that arrives after Iranian commanders have had time to move everything that can move. In strike planning, that difference is measured in aircraft and pilots. We showed you in the video on the Ford Strike Group how carrier air wings structure their seed packages for Hormuz operations. The geometry, the timing, the layered approach. What we did not show you, because it was not available then, was what loads those jamming pod mission files before the Growlers even start their engines. What happens in the electronic warfare cell on the carrier when a collection package comes in from the Gulf of Oman, and analysts spend 3 months turning raw emissions data into a suppression doctrine that every strike pilot in the wing will fly on? The Triton bought that doctrine. One airframe, one engagement, 600 kilometers of previously opaque coastal air defense infrastructure, now mapped in the frequency domain. Here's the take that will probably draw some pushback. The loss of the Triton should have been announced differently. Not as a drone shootdown. Not as an incident to be acknowledged and minimized. It should have been announced as nothing. The Pentagon's initial confirmation, yes, we lost the aircraft, handed Iran a propaganda victory that had no corresponding intelligence cost to the United States, because the intelligence was already collected. The statement served no operational security interest. It served institutional face safety. And in doing so, it told Iranian commanders that the engagement had landed politically, that the $240 million price tag had registered as intended. Iran needed to believe it won. The Pentagon's statement helped them believe it. But there is a complication here that the Navy's own analysts are wrestling with openly inside the classified system. Iran is not naive. They do not have access to the Growler's mission recordings. They do not know precisely what was collected or how complete the profile is. But Iranian air defense commanders understand the mechanics of SEAD collection. They know that an engagement of that duration against a platform operating with a monitoring aircraft in the area produces exploitable emissions data. They know they gave something away. The question, and this is where the equation gets uncomfortable, is whether what they gave away is still valid when the order to use it arrives. Frequency modification for the Mirage 4 system is not a software update. The Mirage 4 was domestically developed with Iranian technical infrastructure, which means frequency reconfiguration requires coordination at the battalion level and involves physical changes to radar hardware that take time, create their own distinctive electromagnetic signatures during testing, and cannot be completed quietly. Based on analogous cycles observed in Russian-supplied systems operated in Syria and other conflict environments, frequency change timelines run anywhere from 6 to 18 months. Iranian-developed systems may have different parameters. The engineering constraints remain similar. The Navy has a window, minimum 6 months, potentially through the end of the current deployment cycle and into the next. That window is what the current strike planning cycle is built around. One detail that stuck with me going through the public technical record on the Sevam Khordad program. The system entered service in 2019 and has been upgraded at least twice since then, with each upgrade cycle documented by imagery analysts tracking activity at the Shiraz Defense Manufacturing Complex. Each upgrade cycle correlates with a period of reduced operational activity at known battery positions. Batteries that go quiet for weeks, then resume operations with subtly different emission characteristics. The clock on the data collected over the Gulf of Oman is not open-ended, and the Navy knows it. Would the window still be valid if the strike order comes in 18 months rather than 6? Drop your answer, yes or no, in the comments. This is where it leaves us. The Navy paid $240 million to learn how to suppress air defenses it has not yet been ordered to suppress. The Growler has the mission files. The harm shooters know the coordinates. The strike package knows which 11-second window to fly through, and which ridge provides masking against the guidance radar's tracking beam. But the order has not come, and that is the arithmetic Iran is counting on. Not that it can stop a strike once authorized. Iranian defense planners are not operating under the illusion that the Sevam Khordad network defeats a full carrier air wing attack, supported by EA-18G Growlers carrying preloaded suppression data. The calculation is more precise than that. The calculation is that the American political system will take longer to authorize a strike than the intelligence advantage will remain valid. Every month of delay narrows the suppression window. The behavioral profiles collected from that specific crew, in that specific engagement, will not match the crew that mans the battery when the strike finally comes. Crews rotate, personnel change, operators are reassigned. The 11-second commitment window that the Growler recorded was that crew's pattern. The next crew may be faster, or slower, or trained differently. Iran's strategy is not electronic. It is temporal. Wait, modify, disperse, force another collection cycle. Make the next Triton as expensive as the last one. Subscribe to Navy Strikeforce. Because what the Gulf of Oman engagement revealed about how the Navy fights in the electromagnetic domain before the first missile ever leaves a rail is the equation nobody else is calculating. We do not celebrate weapons. We calculate whether they work. The Triton was spent on a specific intelligence gap, at a specific moment in a specific threat environment, against a specific set of batteries operated by specific crews. Whether that investment pays its full dividend depends on one variable that no amount of electronic warfare planning can control: the clock that started counting the moment the Mirage 4 went dark over the Gulf of Oman. It is still running.